Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillahi. You know, recent times have been very interesting. There's been a number of contradictions that manifest themselves. And I think that really we're at a time period of great self-examination. There's a situation that has arisen with all of these conditions that we're living under that are forcing us to look at the contradictions that we have within ourselves. And I think that that is the greatest spiritual moment of all in recent times, that we are being forced to look at ourselves, to look at our intentions, to look at our orientation to life in general and how we deal with things. There's definitely a dilemma for those who claim to be spiritual and those who are claiming that you should just focus on yourself and your relationship with Allah and so on and so forth. The dilemma that they face is that as they are focusing on their own perfection and gaining Jannah, which has been the push even of some imams and some scholars and so on and so forth, focus on yourself. You know, that's what you need to worry about. You need to worry about being saved from the hellfire. Well, you know, the fact that people are ignoring the taking of life, even if we say that this has always been the case, you know what I'm saying? Society itself now is coming up to one voice and saying that is wrong. And so no matter how much people sit back and talk about spirituality, well, look, even the most materialist person is coming out and saying this is wrong. And so it's a moment in which we're finding that we have to question even those that are claiming to be spiritual. You know, like, what is your real concern at the end of the day? It actually looks like people are on their own personal well-being journey, and it doesn't matter if everyone around them collapses. You know, so that's a judgment which I think that people should take to heart, and so that there can be a self-examination process. The moral contradiction of the conservatives is that for all the pro-life talks, for all the, you know, the whole issue of law and order, and for all of the talks of right and wrong, we see that now, you know, many are supporting the breakdown of law and order, are supporting the whole issue of the destruction of life. You know, when you regard that there's no necessity for due process, there's no necessity for a court of law, there's no necessity for, you know, judging a person according to their deeds, and that they should be punished according to their deeds, that the punishment, if there's one that's necessary, should be equivalent to the crime. All of that has gone out the door. And so it's really making the conservatives, is really putting the conservatives in a dilemma. And then, you know, there's something very interesting here, is that what you're beginning to see, especially with the protests, is people of all different backgrounds, all different philosophies, all different orientations are coming out. You know, and this is a time period, you know, and I want to close with this. This is a time period in which everything is being put to the test. You know, whether we look at the COVID-19 and how it forced us into quarantine, and it is really challenging what our values, you know, as far as religiosity is concerned, and how do we look at the world, how do we look at others, how do we look at life. And then now this layer has come out of, you know, the issue of police brutality, which actually there's been three killings in a matter of a couple weeks. 3 police killings, you know, where people have been shot down by the police. It's just that people have been focusing on George Floyd, but there's been about 3, you know, that have taken place. And so it continues. And so that is challenging our sense of justice and our sense of what does it mean to be a part of a society, and so on and so forth, and our sense of right and wrong, and what will be the limit. What will be the limit? And it's interesting because as a student of history, you know, the time period of Nazi Germany was an interesting time period, because right before it arose, the Nazi regime, there were social scientists who had asked the question. They asked the question, will the Germans allow a democratic society to collapse? Will they allow it to collapse and give into fascism? And those social scientists, they were answered with a real, with a real life situation. They weren't answered theoretically. And the life situation was that the Germans would not uphold democracy. And so a lot of those social scientists ended up leaving. They migrated from Germany and they went to New York, and they were the founders of the New School for Social Research. We're in a similar situation. Will citizens of the US allow for the breakdown of society to occur such that, what you're seeing take place is taking place? This is just one phase of this. We're just talking about the phase of what? We're talking about the phase of police brutality. But there's another phase. The other phase is that we have allowed for so long for the rich to manipulate the situation in their favor and demonize the poor. They're talking about, and I keep mentioning this in lives so that it stays fresh on people's minds. They're talking about removing any sort of safety net for those who can't pay their rent and their mortgage. And mind you, most places are not back to work. People are not working. And remind you that those 2.5 million jobs that were added on to the economy, those were in the restaurant industry, in the food industry. In other words, those are not jobs that can support, a family with middle class expenses. Those are not jobs that can support, a family of four that is even in poverty. Those are jobs which are not even really significant. And so we're going to be looking at not only this issue of police brutality, we're going to be looking at a class struggle. We're going to be looking at an economic crisis. And the question is, will, people stay in their moral dilemma? Will you stay stuck with debates about who is doing what and why you can't join this group or why you can't join that group, and you will stay silent as society cracks before you? That's where we're at, people. We're at a time in which, we didn't speak out. We watched the first stimulus package come out. The banks were bailed out once again. The rich were bailed out, and then we watched DC politicians, which are making money from our tax dollars, tell us that they're not going to support the people. And society stayed quiet. Whereas all of American society that is being impacted by this economic situation should have come out and say, no, that's our tax dollars that we put into the system. And we demand that those dollars be returned to us in a time of crisis so that we have economic stability and so that our society is not put in a predicament and where people begin to rob and loot and do whatever they do when poverty strikes at a point where people are feeling desperation and despair. That's what happens usually. You look and you study these realities, that's what happens. When these types of situations, economic downturns hit, even when you have disasters, usually there's a period of unrest and there's a period of robbing and looting and all that. That happens when society becomes disoriented and chaotic. We stayed quiet on that. And so the question becomes, how long will we stay quiet when we're supposed to be in a democratic society? And that means that you're supposed to be able to voice your position. You're supposed to say, I'm a citizen of this society. I care in what direction it's going in, and I disagree with the way that this is going. That's part of living in a democratic society, whether some like it or not. Islamically, you can justify that from the angle of saying that, well, that's a way to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. And so ideally, each person should have some sort of conception of society or some sort of understanding of what a good society looks like, so that when you raise your voice, it's substantial. But what we're hearing is imams, mashaykh, masjid leaders, community leaders, dawah people, they're focused on other issues. That's just the reality. They're focused on talking about the authenticity of people's positions. They're focused on talking about the spiritual life. They're not focused on the application of the deen to the moment, to the here, to the now. And that shows where there is a moral crisis and a dilemma. And those who are focused on the idea of just arguing, that this is a liberal agenda, that Black Lives Matters is the LGBT group and all of this type of stuff, it shows that you're in a dilemma yourself, because you're focused on trying to argue against a group, but you yourself haven't talked about what is your position as a Muslim. You yourself haven't taken a position as a Muslim in action, because we don't want to hear what you have to say, really. In reality, this is not a time for words. This is a time of like, what are you doing? Right. And so Muslims also, and I'm closing with this, stop trying to use this as an opportunity for photo ops, to show yourself making salah in a protest. If the question really is like, where are you at in social justice? Where are you at in really impacting the world? Where are you at in terms of your commitment? In reality, the Muslims don't have a commitment to social justice. Islam has a commitment to social justice, but the Muslims don't have a commitment to social justice. And that's what the moment has shown us. That's the contradiction. That the moment has shown us that for so many people claiming to be religious, to be on the Sunnah, to be people with purification of the heart, and so on and so forth, you failed. You failed to be able to be the voice standing up for justice. Now imagine if this was the time period, in which the companions lived. If they would allow for someone to be murdered in their society, right? And what they would do. This just happened to be one amongst many cases. But, do we think that an Islamic society allows for people just to be murdered in the street? That's one issue. The second issue is, imagine Quraysh during the time of Jahiliyyah. Think about Hifd al-Fudul, when there was a man that complained about being unjustly treated, and how the Quraysh, who are kuffar, they joined together and they made a pact to ensure that no one would be unjustly treated in their society. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ affirmed that pact. Honestly, Muslims, you have to get yourself together. You're in a dilemma. If you want to critique the liberals have put you on the spot. They're challenging your morality at this time. Where do you really stand on issues? Right? And so you're in a crisis. Those who claim spiritual perfection and we're going to focus on the spiritual life in the hereafter, you're in a crisis. Because if the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said that he will affirm Hifd al-Fudul, or that pact or that treaty for justice and goodness, what do you affirm? Just a focus on your own salvation? What do you affirm at the end of the day? Because as society burns, it shows how many are willing to really put in the work to make a better world. What happens when mass unemployment hits and we all begin to be struck by that? What are you willing to do to better the society? Because, the sad part of this all is that when we look at a place like Seattle, in that autonomous zone, the reports that we get from a place like that is that they freed up the zone. There's no report of crimes, and people are giving away free food, and they're taking care of each other. And let me tell you something. I saw a similar thing when I was in Puerto Rico. I saw the level of organization by some of these groups. When they came together, they were way more organized than what you see the Muslims. They were distributing food. People were working 15, 20-hour days. They weren't doing it for photo ops. They were committed to the cause. They were in a cooperative form. There wasn't a lot of debate. If there was debate, they would squash it. We're sitting here debating. We're sitting here without objectives, without goals. We're sitting here taking photo ops. We've come late on the scene. And so those who claim spirituality and those who claim morality, at this point in time, you're in a crisis. Because really, the moment in history is judging. If you are the people, right, that claim to have the spiritual life, and you are the people that claim to be the knowers of right and wrong, where do you stand while you watch your own society, challenge you on your positions? Because there's so many people that are out there, right, that you will consider undesirable, that they're upholding human dignity. They're standing up for justice. They're looking to create a better world. While other people are trying to retreat and claim that they have the safety position, that they're the people of justice, they're the people right or wrong, they're the people that, understand right and wrong. And so that becomes the dilemma that people are in right now. And so we shouldn't confuse this as an issue of liberalism, or we shouldn't confuse this as the issue of, people just being chaotic, this, that. No, society is saying that there's something deeply wrong with the way that things are going. And society is saying that there's a better way. And so that is challenging most of the religious leaders. It's challenging most of the politicians. And that's why you see the politicians are late. That's why you see one by one they're falling in line, because in a democracy, when people begin to voice themselves, and when you see such a large group of people that begins to look like a majority, they're saying no to social breakdown, no to the violation of human dignity, no to fascism.